Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughn Manor. And it's the Avengers Forever read-along, part 3 of 4. So yeah, the Avengers Forever read-along, part 3 of 4. This was the Avengers miniseries from the late 90s, which was a big deal Avengers story. I'm doing this read-along along with Steve Donoghue and Matthew at Mayberry Bookclub. And I am going to give you a brief summary of what goes on in issues 7 through 9 of Avengers Forever, the portion of the story that we're covering today. And then next week will be our triumphant conclusion. So, an odd band of Avengers plucked out of the time stream from different places is trying to save Rick Jones and perhaps reality itself. Rick Jones was that permanent sidekick that I told you about last time. Anyway, from Immortus, the strange master of time, Immortus, who is also Kang the Conqueror. He's both those characters, but he is the future version of Kang. Anyway, when last we were with our merry band of Avengers, they vowed that they would take the battle to Immortus. They're going to go to Limbo to find out what they can find out about Immortus's plan just by going straight to Limbo, the stronghold of Immortus, because why not? That's their whole plan. Their whole plan is just to do that. So they do that. On the way there, they have a bunch of visions, one of which involves the Vision. Anyway, they go to Limbo, and Limbo looks different every time you look at it. Like here, it's a big floating ball thing. Artwork is magnificent, as usual in these issues. And so they go to Limbo. They don't really accomplish too much for the most part, but Captain America does run into Nick Fury, or a version of Nick Fury. He keeps changing. And probably the biggest thing that happens in this issue is that the crazy version of Giant Man, the crazy version of Dr. Pym, which is one of the Avengers from the past, Yellow Jacket, decides he doesn't want to become the current version of Dr. Pym, Giant Man, and so he's going to betray his fellow Avengers to Immortus and make a deal with Immortus, so that he will never become this person he doesn't want to become. All makes sense, right? So that's basically that issue. But the interesting stuff happens in the next couple of issues. By the end of this issue, Yellow Jacket is like, yeah, Immortus, I'll help you take out the Avengers. Now, in this issue, which was issue number 8, they get a hold of one of the Space Phantoms, and the Space Phantoms is going to spill the beans on Immortus's entire plot. And he ends up telling an entire secret history of the Avengers. And this is where things get interesting, and I will tell you why. So it turns out that Immortus, who was at one time Kang, well, as both Kang and Immortus, he's been messing around with the history of the Avengers like forever. An interesting thing about comic books, when they go on for several hundred issues, is that you have different writers, you have different artists, all telling these stories with villains who recur and come back, and the characters are not always consistent from writer to writer, the villains especially. And you can end up with inconsistencies and plot holes and stories that seem to conflict with each other. And that happened a lot with the Avengers. If you were reading the Avengers from issue 1 all the way through the late 90s when this was published, and you were reading closely, you would find a lot of plot holes and inconsistencies with the stories. And that is certainly true with the writer of this series, Kurt Busiek and Roger Stern. So they decide they're going to fix a lot of those plot holes and inconsistencies with this story. All those plot holes and inconsistencies, they were all because of Immortus and Kang the Conqueror messing around with time and the time stream. So you get this really interesting history of the Avengers, but it's really a history of Immortus messing around with the Avengers and his various plots to mess around with the Avengers. So basically, Immortus has been hired for his job by these 3 alien beings called the Time Keepers. I know, a terrifying name, the Time Keepers. Anyway, the Time Keepers want to get rid of the Avengers altogether because there is a possible future where the Avengers cause great destruction, or because of their influence, the Avengers cause great destruction in the future. Also, the Timekeepers want to keep Earthlings from moving out into space, because if they move out to space, human beings, being what they are, will cause great destruction on every planet they go to. And so Immortus' job is to keep that from happening. And the Timekeepers are like, just wipe out the Avengers, man, and just get rid of Rick Jones, because he's one of the major players in one of the alternate futures, which causes all kinds of trouble. So he's like, just kill him. So Immortus is trying to keep the Avengers alive, because he does have a soft spot for the Avengers, because he respects bravery. And so basically, that issue is about that. And the following issue is the same kind of thing, but it's told from Kang's perspective. Kang, this fella who's lounging around, is the past version of Immortus. All this makes total sense, I'm sure. So anyway, Kang has also been messing around with Avengers history, and we get a lot of that backstory in that issue. Now, the interesting part of this whole thing is because you realize when you're reading this, especially at this point in the story, that the Avengers, as fun as they are, and this is an Avengers comic book, this comic book isn't really about the Avengers as much as it is about the main character of this story, which is Kang. This is a story about Kang, who eventually becomes Immortus, and what drives Kang and what drives Immortus to do what they do, or to do what he does, since it's only one person. Kang doesn't want to become Immortus, because he feels like Immortus is just like this kind of pencil-pushing guy who's doing whatever the Timekeepers say, and Kang is a conqueror, a man of action, you know. And so he doesn't want to become the guy that Immortus is. At the same time, there are portions of his life where he sees himself sliding in that direction, so he's doing what he can to prevent it, which is interesting. Now, this is echoed by the character of Dr. Pym, who as Yellow Jacket doesn't want to become Giant Man in the future. So we have that kind of thing, those two characters playing off each other, because they both kind of are in the same boat. But really, the story is mostly at this point about Kang and about Immortus. This is a Kang and Immortus story. And so we're given that whole backstory. And by the end of this, let's see if I can get to the end of this. By the end of this, it tells how Kang got involved and with some of the other characters at the beginning of this book. So it explains how Kang is involved, explains how Immortus is involved, and it explains the betrayal of the Avengers by Yellow Jacket. And that's kind of where the Avengers are left off. They're betrayed by their comrade, Yellow Jacket, who is a real jerk and is always blowing bubblegum for some reason. I don't know what his whole thing with bubblegum is. Who knows? But anyway, that was very confusing, and sorry, but I can't make it any less confusing than that. Next week, I will conclude this read along for the 2 or 3 of you who are left. I appreciate you watching and joining me for the Avengers Forever read along. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.